Okay, so good morning. This is our panel with our New York City and New York State housing and homeless commissioners, some who do both, actually all that pretty much do both, and we're thrilled to have them with us today. I'm just going to do quick introductions because you know them all, but the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Social Services, Steve Banks, thank you for coming. We have Dr. Ann Sullivan, the Commissioner of the State Office of Mental Health. Dr. Sullivan. We have Molly Park, the Deputy Commissioner for Development, New York City Department of Housing, Preservation and Development. And we have Barbara Guinn, Executive Deputy Commissioner to the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. And last but not least, RuthAnne Visnauskas, Commissioner and Chief Executive Officer, New York State Homes and Community Renewal. So please join me in welcoming them. So we're extremely excited to have our panelists here with us today. You could not have a more knowledgeable nor dedicated crowd of commissioners in any state across the country. We are thrilled to be having this discussion that is actually turning from advocacy, although I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit, but then to also going into implementation around our new supportive housing development. And really every government partner that we work with at the network has been so incredibly supportive. And we really want to talk today about both the governor and the mayor's commitment and how things are looking for homelessness across New York State. So we're going to just start with each commissioner giving just a few minutes, just kind of saying good morning, talking about their priorities, what they're looking forward to, their challenges, and then we're going to ask questions, and it's going to be a great panel. So thank you. I'm going to start with Commissioner Banks.
Not even a setup question to get me going. Okay. Good morning. Look, it's great to be here. I think last year we had just completed the 90-day review of homeless services and had begun the integration of HRA and DHS, which we've now actually completed. I think that just to highlight our priorities gives you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish. First of all, we continue with a prevention first strategy, and I think you see that reflected in the commitment to universal access to counsel and housing court. First such initiative over the course of 5 years to at the end of 5 years have all tenants in housing court under 200% of poverty with a lawyer and over 200% be provided with advice and counsel. We've seen a 24% drop in evictions during the time of expanding access to counsel, and we think that it will have a further, obviously, positive impact for clients by doing this. We've continued to provide substantial amounts of rent arrears to prevent people from losing a roof over their heads. 161,000 households have gotten rent arrears over the last several years. We're very much focused on bringing people off the streets. Over the past year, 748 people came in as a result of the Homestead Initiative and have stayed in. And we're going to continue to build on that case-by-case success with terrific not-for-profit partners. We're very focused, obviously, on supportive and permanent housing. First 500 of our 15,000 supportive housing units will be up this year. Appreciate the not-for-profit partners that are making that possible. We continue to provide substantial amounts of rental assistance and rehousing. 57,000 men, women, and children have either moved out of shelter or avoided going into shelter as a result of these rental assistance and rehousing initiatives. And of course, you know of our plan to close 360 locations around the city, shrink the footprint of the DHS shelter system by 45% and replace those 360 locations with a smaller number of 90 new higher quality shelters. We've already gotten out of 842 cluster units. 23% of the cluster units are now closed. And we've gotten the first 5 shelters up in the last 90 days. And again, I really appreciate the partnership with the not-for-profit community. So these are our priorities, and the end result is really a vision of transforming the shelter system to one that's borough-based, that's focused on people, even as we continue to put resources in permanent housing and to prevent homelessness in the first place.
Thank you. Councilman Sullivan.
Hi, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you, and I just want to first of all thank you. I know so many faces in the audience who every day work so closely with us and with our mentally ill clients to provide really excellent housing and excellent supports for them. And I think that the work that you do, sometimes it's important to just think back a little bit and remember. I've been around a long time. And in the 1950s and 60s, there were 90,000 individuals in the state hospital system. Today, we have 42,000 units of supported housing for the seriously mentally ill. That's a huge transformation. It's not there yet. We need to do a lot more, but it's a huge transformation. And you're a part of that. And when you talk about the goals for us in the Office of Mental Health, it's that ultimately every individual with serious mental illness has the right to full recovery, and a huge piece of that right to full recovery is a safe, affordable, good place to live in a community where they can be integrated and become a part of that community. And all of you are a part of helping us make that happen. I know we're not there yet. I know there's going to be lots of questions about some of the processes, but I think it's important to know that even as we've downsized some of these beds, that at this point in time we are reinvesting for those of you who don't know, $110,000 into community services for every bed I close. And that's been a commitment on the governor's part and the legislature to make that happen. And that's really remarkable. Many states have closed beds without investing those kinds of dollars. And a big piece of that has gone to housing as well, in reinvestment. We know there's still challenges ahead. And one of the things I would love to talk to you about and things that we need to plan for are, I think, some special populations that we're still struggling with how to really provide the best wraparound services, make sure that they're there, and really the appropriate kind of housing. And I think that includes those who are criminally justice involved. We all know that that's very hard to deal with, and I think one of the things that we haven't been successful as a nation yet is in making sure that individuals with mental illness are not as large a number of the individuals in jails and prisons. That's a real failure of the system. It's something we have to work on, and housing is critical. And it's support services, it's also stigma, and it's also placement. I think the other is transitional age youth. I think that there's an increasing need for housing that really serves those young adults moving into, late adolescence into young adulthood. And the other are the elderly, the two ends of the spectrum. Thank God we've been good at being able to keep many of our serious mentally ill to live full, productive lives, and now they're aging. And where can they be? What kind of housing is appropriate for that population? So those are some of the challenges ahead. I think we've also had lots of successes. I think that the governor's commitment to supportive housing is truly remarkable. Again, I've been around a long time, and I haven't often seen those kinds of commitments. It's getting out there. We can talk later on some of the numbers of what's been happening, but that commitment to have that kind of housing out for all those who need it, the serious mentally ill and other populations, is just remarkable. And while it takes time for it to appear sometimes, you got to get all that you guys know, the amount of time, I think that basically we're on a great road here. And sometimes it's good to pause and think there's a lot of good stuff going on despite everything that we kind of struggle with every day. So again, thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. Thanks.
I want to start by sending Commissioner Torres Springer's regrets. She really wanted to be here this morning, but unfortunately had a memorial service she had to attend. We are 3 years and a little bit into the Housing New York plan. At this point, we have closed 63,398 units, who's counting. So we're thrilled about that. We're ahead of schedule. I'm particularly pleased to say that more than anticipated of those units are for extremely low and very low income households. So we're doing a very good job getting to the lowest levels of affordability. And the mayor has just added almost $2 billion to our capital budget so that we can continue to do that and continue to expand on that. Something I'm really thrilled to be able to do more to serve those very lowest income households. That includes households in the shelter system, it includes supportive housing, and it includes the 30% of AMI family who is housed today, but frankly could be tomorrow's shelter household. To get those dollars out onto the street, we have recently revamped our 2 primary new construction term sheets. They're up on our website. You should go take a look. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those, but a couple of things that I want to highlight that I think are particularly critical changes. First, within ELA, which is our extremely low and low income program, right, which is for almost exclusively for the lower income tiers. What we have now is a homeless requirement, but also really have set up the subsidy standards so that we are also going to be serving those 30 and 40% AMI households. That had been the case in the past, but the way the subsidies were structured, really there was a very strong incentive to do much higher proportion of homeless households and virtually no 30%, 40% AMI house units. So the effect was that the homeless household units were crowding out the 30% AMI units. Certainly, it is critically important that we serve the 30% AMI, the homeless households, but also it's homeless prevention to be serving the 30% AMI households. It's a population that is desperately in need of housing. I think I'm really pleased that we're going to be able to do both instead of having the 2 populations compete with one another going forward. And then in Mix and Match, which is our mixed income program, which did not previously have either a homeless requirement or an extremely low income requirement. We've added both of those to that program as well. And I think this is very important because one of the things that is a priority for us is that we are putting out buildings that can be sustainable over the long term. Right? It's one thing to finance the capital and to come to the ribbon cutting. It's another thing to make sure that those are high quality neighborhood assets for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20. And so to be able to make sure that the buildings that have relatively solid cash flow because they are serving some higher income households, those are the places where we can do a very good job. We can do a much better job and are going to be doing a much better job getting the lower income units in there as well. So that is term sheet world. To speak a little bit about what we're doing to serve homeless families in general, there's 3 initiatives of this administration and HPD that I want to highlight, absolutely none of which I can take any credit for. They all happened before I got to HPD. But first of all, we have really been much more comprehensive and thoughtful about our homeless set-asides. We've had homeless set-asides in a couple of programs for a long time. Certainly, supportive housing loan program has predominantly served homeless households. But now there is virtually nothing you are going to do with HPD, including all of our preservation programs, that does not have a homeless set-aside. And I think that's critically important. Another really key innovation is that those homeless set-asides do not all now depend on rental assistance. In our new construction programs, in ELA, in Mix and Match, we are underwriting units to shelter allowance, right? So we are underwriting units of 2-bedroom apartments at $425 a month, right? That is a huge departure from what has been done in the past, and I think it's critically important to making sure that we can serve the most number of homeless families, because those rental assistance it's still important, but it can go elsewhere, right? So we're not double dipping in both cases. And then we have made a lot of process improvements to our referral system so that we are much more able to make sure that the homeless set-asides that we do create are serving the households who are really in need of the housing, that we are matching getting the referrals from DHS, that we are getting those households to the developers, and that when the units become vacant, 5 years, 10 years down the road, that re-rental process is also going to a homeless family. So that is a much tighter and more centralized process than it has been in the past. With challenges, I will say, virtually everything that we do, and particularly virtually everything that we do in the supportive housing world, depends on Washington. There is very little in new construction that we do that does not have low-income housing tax credits. We do not do supportive housing without Section 8. Very little supportive housing without Section 8. And the home program is also critically important in this world. So home is on the books is on the list for elimination. Section 8 has been proposed for significant cuts. And just the threat of tax reform is we are seeing drops in 15, 20 cents on the dollar on tax credit raises. So that is a very existential threat to everything that we are trying to do. So we are working very closely with many of you in this room, but there's a lot more to do. I will say if we were going to face this, I would rather do it in New York City than I would anyplace else, because we have a very robust capital budget and we have a lot of really thoughtful and creative people making these projects work, but it is a scary situation that we're in right now.
Thanks, Molly. Barbara?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. I've been with the agency for about 12 years, but the housing portfolio is certainly something that only recently have had the pleasure to begin working with. Prior to that, I've really been focused more on the side of the agency, focusing on public assistance benefits, SNAP benefits, with a specific focus on employment services for individuals with barriers to employment. Really excited to be part of this. Certainly have found this conference, just even this very short time this morning, to be very inspiring. And I also thank you for the work that you do. Certainly supportive housing fills such a critical need in our state. And so we are certainly very happy with the governor's commitment to supportive housing. In terms of our priorities, we are fortunate that with the Homeless Housing Assistance Program, it is fully funded in the state budget with a slight increase, actually. And we would expect the RFP for the new round of funding to be out any day now. So certainly be on the lookout for that. In addition to that being available, it also includes a new component this year, which is valuable for providers outside of New York City to provide up to $1 million to permit shelters to make important health and safety repairs that they may not otherwise be able to address. So that's also an important add for us. We also have full funding for our New York State Supportive Housing Program, which, as you know, serves probably over 160 contractors throughout the state, provide necessary support services for individuals who are residing in supportive housing. And then also continue to have full funding for our Solutions to End Homelessness program. Again, that provides homeless prevention, eviction prevention services, as well as temporary rental supports that are needed, again, to help people avoid becoming homeless. That's a small portion of it. We also will continue in 2017 to place an emphasis with our Division of Shelter Oversight and Compliance. Not necessarily the most sexy topic, but it certainly is extremely critical to making sure that when individuals do find themselves homeless and they need to be placed in emergency housing in a shelter situation, that we know that they're being placed in a place that is safe, clean, and secure, and hopefully also receiving services they need to move to independence. So we're continuing our commitment to inspect every shelter in the state and to work with the local partners and providers as well as social services districts to achieve improvements when necessary, again, to make sure people are in a safe and healthy environment. Lastly, I would just say, we're very pleased with the strong partnership that the state has when it comes to housing. I would say that at the state level, but also state partners working with local leaders and also the nonprofit community. Again, we know that we all need to be moving in the same direction if we want to make a difference. I think we all want to make a difference. We know this is important to address the housing needs of every resident in the state. So, OTDA certainly is committed to continuing to work with state and local partners, in particular social services commissioners, including Commissioner Banks, as well as other commissioners throughout the state, again, to meet what we know is a common objective that all of us have to meet the housing needs, in particular the needs of those individuals who have special needs. So thank you.
Good morning. I will since I'm last, I'll go brief so we can get to questions. But thanks for having me. It was great to be at the SHNNY Conference. Many of you have heard me say, probably more times than are sick of hearing it, but that we are thrilled to announce that as folks know, that the governor announced this $20 billion homelessness and housing affordable housing plan last year. Included in that was a 20,000 unit supportive housing commitment over 10 years. Fast forward to now, we just got approved in our budget $2.5 billion for the next 5 years to cover the housing plan, which is sort of first in state history to have a consistent, large or 5-year both dollar and sort of unit commitment. So we're sort of thrilled to get underway on that. We have huge demand. Even last year, we had, without the housing plan, we had about $300 million available, and we had about $650 million of demand against that. So we know everyone is busy, and so we are anxiously looking forward to getting our dollars out the door. Last year, we did around 600 supported units, not including units that OSDA and OMH produced as well. So we do have a good, strong base, but are definitely looking to grow that. And I'll sort of answer the question about how one might do that, which would be for HCR. Most people are applying to us through our 2 funding rounds, either through the Unified Funding Round, which the RFP goes out over the summer. Last year we had an early round specifically targeted for supported housing, which was great for our 9% deals. And then our open window RFP for our 4% deals was hoping that it was going to be out yesterday, so we could be talking about it today, but we didn't quite make that deadline. But it will be going out in the next couple of days. It'll be almost $600 million of funding across a variety of programs. Included in that will be about $175 million for the SHOP program, the Supportive Housing Opportunities Program, which folks saw us roll out last year preliminarily and will now come out sort of more robustly this year and continue over the next years as part of the plan. So those are our sort of 2 main funding sources. We are obviously looking to ramp up our production to meet the 6,000 unit supportive housing goal over the next 5 years. So we are always available to have folks come and talk to us about projects. I would just end and sort of echo what Barbara said and Molly said around in the face of federal cuts, which we all think about. Certainly I can't say 9% tax credits, 4% tax credits, all you have without thinking about tax reform and federal cuts and what that might do to the pipeline. But which is also to say that between the city and the state, I think more than any time, that the commitment to affordable housing in terms of resources and dollars is sort of unparalleled than it is at this moment across sort of city and state. And we spent a lot of time collaborating. It doesn't, as you can tell sort of by the depth of the panel, it isn't sort of one agency or one government that can do all this. It really takes all of us in all these places attacking the issue from different angles to get it done. We all work together very well. We obviously appreciate having such a intelligent and smart and thoughtful supportive housing community that helps us get our dollars out the door and get this work actually done. But I sort of mean in this sincere way that we really all are sort of collaboratively getting at this, and we need to do more. And so I think we want to continue to work with everyone to get that done.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can everybody hear our panelists? So we're going to do something a little bit different. I am going to ask for questions up front. They will not be answered right away, but if like you had something burning, usually what happens at this panel is we never have time at the end for the audience. So we're going to if you could throw out some questions that are on your mind, and I'm going to try to work it into the Q&A that we've already worked on together. So anybody want to hear something in particular? Yes.
Hi. My name is Nadine Selby. I am a housing benefit specialist at Manhattan Daytop Village, Myrtle Avenue Mass Shelter. Hello.
Hi, good morning.
So, listening to the panel, I was wondering if all of the initiatives that's coming down the pike, initiatives that already been going on, such as New York City 1515, right? The new one that just came about last month, technically. What about the New York 4? I remember 2 years ago when I was at this conference, it was mentioned that money would be allocated for New York 4, which is supposed to be for seniors, if I recall correctly. So what's going on with that?
Okay.
Because you talk about allocating money for the HOPE and getting 35,000 units. So what's going on with that?
Okay, great, thank you. We're going to address that. Anyone else? Oh, come on, my people. Let's go.
I'm Dottie Mohan from the Bronx Health and Housing Consortium, and we work a lot with healthcare providers and housing providers, and we see now finally a awareness on the health side of how important housing is, and I'm curious how you see the role of housing in meeting the health needs, particularly chronic illness, amongst the people living in your buildings and shelters. And it's kind of predominantly for Commissioner Banks, but anyone else that wants to weigh in.
Terrific. Others?
Yes, I wanted to ask if Commissioner Banks could comment on how the New York City 15 units are going to be allocated amongst various populations, the vulnerability index, where the city is with that.
Okay, thank you. You said vulnerability index?
Vulnerability index
Okay.
15.
Great. Others? Wow. Yes. Karen?
Yeah, Karen Jorgensen from Valley Lodge. I just wanted to know how the three-quarter house initiative is going, because as a director of a shelter, occasionally I will get calls from mostly men who are living in three-quarter houses and would prefer to live in my shelter.
Great, thank you. Any other last burning questions? Okay, well maybe we'll also have time at the end. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Julia DiGiacomo, Senior Program Manager, Campo Magnolia House, Women's Shelter. So in listening to the panel and all the great initiatives, I find in my years of experience at the shelter, one of the most critical populations that we often, I feel, could do a better job with is the chronically homeless and the long-term shelter stays, because those are the most fragile of the group, and even the supportive housing units that do open up for them are seeking more independent people to live in their units, and so it often leaves them disenfranchised.
Right.
Okay.
A very challenging topic. Okay, great. Well, thank you. So we're going to start off. So a very good question, and I think that we've come to a different point in our history. We have 3 New York agreements that spanned 25 years that I think everyone's very familiar with. The first 2 were to house mentally ill individuals. And then the third one actually opened up and did 9,000 units for 9,000 populations. I mean, 9 populations, my God, too many zeros. And so those 9 populations was really a lot of experience was drawn from creating programs for youth aging out of foster care and families with head of household chronically ill, with people in recovery and people actively using. And of course our mental health units. So it was families and adults and youth, so it was a lot of populations mixed in. So we've learned a lot from there. And what I think is terrific, although, and I think we reflected it today with Assemblymember Hevesi, the governor and the mayor were not able to come together to sit down and negotiate an agreement for a New York 4. So although those units still exist and they take referrals and they're our most vibrant of our supportive housing units, we're now entering a new decade where we have 2 parallel agreements. So we have, we'll talk about it this morning, the city's New York City 1515, which is 15,000 units in 15 years, and the state's Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative. And so we're going to talk about both of them today, and what really gives me really confidence and comfort in how we're going to go forward is that you can hear the collaboration already from the panel. Even though maybe we couldn't have the higher-ups agree to where we should be together, we definitely have people in our state and city agencies that are working together every day to get these units done. And we really cannot do them without each other. So we're in different territory, a different time, but we think it's very exciting, and we're going to talk a little bit about it more today. So I'm going to start with RuthAnne and kind of looking at the state's plan. As we all know, HCR has mainly been an affordable housing development engine for the state, and it is now taking a leadership role in the supportive housing development. And so we just have the commitment from the governor to funding the 6,000 units. We're hoping for the additional 14,000 in the next 10 years after that. And so we just wanted to hear from you today about how the program is going, challenges. I think that as a community, we were a little challenged because the RFPs didn't all line up. So we had SHNNY come out right kind of on top of the HCR capital programs. And then we also didn't have the OMH pre-development program going, which really aided a lot of nonprofits to help them get their sites and get that development started. So RuthAnne.
Yes, thanks. I'll defer the sort of ESHI and the OMH pre-development to Dr. Sullivan, because she can sort of better speak to those. But we, as folks know, last year the ESHI came out and there were a lot of awards that were made, and then we have started to, as folks have gotten through their sort of pre-development process, obviously started to close those. And we'll continue to close folks that have awards that have sites, and we have given capital commitments to many of those. So we have a robust pipeline. As everyone knows, we work statewide, and so our upstate demand is strong as well as our New York City demand. But we are certainly looking for folks to keep bringing us more deals. We will come out, as I said, in the next couple of days with about $175 million through our open window RFP. The structure will look not dissimilar to what folks saw last year. We're going to tweak our subsidy levels a little bit, but we certainly want to build that pipeline. I'll talk for, a minute about it, and maybe Molly will talk about this also, about sort of how we operate in an environment where there are two agreements, not one, because I think it can be a little math challenging. And so we, as I said, and we'll probably say too many times, we work really closely together, and we are cognizant of the fact that we don't want to be funding and counting the same units, and that the 20,000 and the 15,000 are in fact the same. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to independently fund every project, because there are reasons why, and there are sort of project characteristics that some projects get funded by both HPD and HCR. Some things are going to get funded by OTDA and HPD, by OTDA and HCR, and you all know sort of the mix. And that's okay. I don't think everyone is trying to sort of isolate and go into their own silo and say, like, we're only going to do our units and we're only going to fund our things. And just know that sort of in the background, we also are sort of keeping track to make sure that we're all being true to our units and not sort of double counting everything as we go. So I think I'll leave it with that.
Okay. Terrific. And then, Dr. Sullivan, maybe you can just continue along the ESHI or the ESHI road and talk to us about, so State Office of Mental Health used to be the primary driver, as everyone knows, of supportive housing development in the state. And now the program has been consolidated under HCR, but OMH is playing a lead role in the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative in coordinating all of the state agencies. And so we wanted to hear about how that work is going and how the pre-development fund is looking.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I think this has been a great initiative working together with HCR and OTDA. And although we're the kind of the major facilitator, partly because we have this history of doing supportive housing, it really is among all the agencies. I mean, there are 9 agencies. Moira Tashton, who is kind of doing a lot of the chairing of the meetings, but she always reminds me, even though I keep pushing for, our serious mentally ill, that this is really a cooperative effort among all of those who need supportive housing, and that's so important. I think sometimes we can get a little bit lost in advocating for our groups, but we know that there's a need out there for so many different groups, and all those 9 agencies have come together in a terrific way. Just to give you a few of the numbers, I think, if I'm wrong, Moira will correct me, but there are about 369 3,695 individual housing awards made for individuals. 741 of those have been made permanent. The 3,600 were the conditional awards. So we're moving along, and now there are 741 that have been made permanent out of ESHI. In both groups, about mental health is probably about a third of those awards. And the reason I mentioned earlier the 90,000 individuals who are in state hospitals is that we are still struggling with getting up to a number that meets the needs of the seriously mentally ill, who were the responsibility of the states and remain the responsibility of the states. So while it seems like a big chunk of it, I think it is a way to try to deal with that issue of deinstitutionalization. But basically, it's moving along in a very positive way. Now, pre-development funds, I know, were a very big issue. And really working very closely with HCR. We now have a plan. The details will be coming out, Moira assures me, imminently, so it should be within a day or so you'll be getting the details. The applications for the pre-development, a week or so. I always push her a little bit, about a week. You should correct me, about a week. But basically, OMH will be, people will be applying to And we will be reviewing those, but we will be doing it in consultation with OTDA and HCR and making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So the money has been, the flow of the funds, which was where we were getting stuck a little bit with this new system, has been decided upon. So the pre-development funds are there and they're real. And you will be hearing very shortly how to apply for them. And I think it will give the not-for-profit agencies just what they've been kind of getting in the past. They should be basically able to do what we've always been able to do in the past. And so that's very exciting. And I think it speaks to how, and I know everybody's mentioned this, how well the agencies have all worked together to make this happen. This is a very exciting time, a lot of housing coming down. I think we have to be careful that we do it right, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And I think that the ESHI group has really come together in a very solid way. So we're very pleased and we're very happy so far with what's happening, and 741 units are out there already, and I think that's great. I think that's great.
That's amazing, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but so the pre-development fund that's being established is for the groups who are doing primarily mental health
Yes,
housing.
it's pre-development, what we'd always had in our system before, so it's OMH housing, pre-development funds for not-for-profits.
Right. So we're very happy to hear that that will be up and running again. And of course in the city, yeah, okay,
I know you guys,
thank you, Mark. And then, of course, everyone knows that in the city, also people go to the New York City Acquisition Fund that's managed by Foresight. And also, that's a great resource for your pre-development funding. Commissioner Guinn, I just want to then also turn to the Homeless Housing and Assistance Program, because that has been doing supportive housing development and shelter renovation rest of state for a very long time. And also in the city ends up being a gap filler for us on numerous occasions, either with HPD or even with HCR. So if you could just talk about how the program's going.
Sure. Going very well, and I'm pleased to say that since its inception, we've been able to provide supportive housing for over 32,000 individuals. So we're very proud of that, and we look forward to continuing to build on those numbers. As you said, HHAP definitely plays a little bit of a different role in New York City versus rest of state. Certainly in the city, it does tend to be one where it's much more blended with other funding streams in order to be able to bring a project to fruition. In rest of state, it often does serve as the only governmental source of funding for the projects. And there are a lot of projects that we have funded, even just last year, where HHAP is the sole source of government funding for those projects. So it certainly fills a need throughout the state. Primarily supportive housing, but HHAP also provides other types of capital construction for other types of housing. About 80% of HHAP is dedicated and has traditionally been used to support supportive housing construction, but about 13% has also been used to provide transitional housing. As you know, transitional housing often is a necessary component of the housing continuum for certain populations. It remains an important need throughout the state. And then the balance, about 6% of HHAP has been used to support construction of emergency housing. Again, the partnership between the agencies, and I would say that the ESHI awards and supports that ESHI has been providing certainly has been working out as we expected in a very positive way, again, to make sure that as projects are looking to move forward for the capital construction, that they also are able to access the support services that are absolutely critical. We want to make sure people are housed, but also very importantly, we want to make sure that people have the services they need so that they can remain stably housed, live independently, and hopefully live very fulfilling lives. Thanks to the work of all of you. During 2016, HHAP, we did see 9 HHAP projects from prior year awards that did move to completion and open. Very proud of that, but also very pleased that we were also in 2016 were able to fund 22 new projects throughout the state. And those projects are expected to support 525 permanent supportive housing units and 162 units of transitional housing.
Great. And as everyone knows, HHAP is triply oversubscribed on an annual basis. So if you're thinking about it, definitely come in and talk to the OTDA team. And Rick is here to figure out getting your application in soon. And also that now turning to kind of the city and how NYC 1515 is going. Molly, maybe we'll start on the capital side first and talking about how the capital has been going so far, the pipeline, and also the rental assistance program is now going to be based at HPD with the services based on the service agency. So if you could speak a little about that.
Sure. So at the risk of repeating things that have been said 72 times already, although we don't have a good New York brand just at the moment, we work extremely closely with our colleagues at the state. There are, as I'm sure many of you know, there are, based on your own project experience, it is not at all unusual to have both city and state in a deal, and we find plenty of ways to get those done. So, I think we are in a different environment than we were before, but it's maybe a little bit less of a departure than it might look from the outside. Our supportive housing pipeline, from a capital perspective, has been going strong and continues to go strong. We are, fund somewhere in the order of 1,000 units of supportive housing. That's including both the supportive units and the non-supportive units within the building every year. From the rental assistance, that piece is just getting off the ground. So the way we are structuring this is that projects will get their tentative award letter from HRA, from the service component. I don't want to step on Commissioner Banks' toes, he can speak to that. But once you have
You can go ahead, it's okay.
Once there's a tentative award on the service side, and we obviously will have been working with you on the capital side, so we will know site control, that's essentially the screening process for getting the rental assistance award. We're going to be putting some FAQ and more detail about process up on we're going to be putting that out over the summer, but we are going to be rolling those out for projects going forward. I don't think anything for FY17, but certainly for FY18.
Okay, great. And Commissioner Banks, you could just lay out the program for us.
Sure. Let me amplify what Molly had to say. So I think the partnership with HPD and with the Social Services Agency in the city is really an important driver of this, that the things that HPD does extremely well, they're doing, and the things that I think are appropriately things that we can do, we're doing, and the things we can't do, God, I'm just very happy HPD can do those. The sort of capital and service relationship is the way that Molly laid it out. Let me talk a little bit about scattered site and the congregate relationship to the program. It's essentially a half and half program, and we had the first awards of 500 plus units that will be up this calendar year in the scattered site model, and those are for single adults and adult families. Somebody alluded to it in their question earlier, there was a terrific task force of many of you in this room, and shared by Laura and HPD and HRA, that developed a whole range of recommendations for making the program run better. The underlying, I think, ingredient that's really important in this program moving forward is that it separates your service dollars from your rent dollars, so the rent dollars don't eat up the service dollars. And that's, I think, an important component of how we designed it, and that the rents would be reflective of the FMR levels as that develops. In terms of who gets the units, there was tremendous amount of work done by the task force of providers and government agency representatives to develop a vulnerability index. In many respects, it will feel and look like the same people who have gotten supportive housing for the terrific work that all of you have done for many years will continue to get supportive housing. But we think it makes it a lot more individual focused rather than a mechanistic 18 units here, 12 units there. And instead, we wanted to really focus on the people who have greatest needs, reflective of some of the questions that came up earlier about who gets in. So we have also streamlined the way in which people will be submitting applications. Some of these are work in progress still, but they were terrific, I think, recommendations from providers about who can do the 2010Es and the relationship between those who may submit and those who may have greater needs, and the role that we really have of identifying in our system people who have greatest needs and making sure that the people with the greatest needs get linked up to these units. So the first 500 scattered sites are awarded, units hitting the ground actually very shortly. The next phase of this in terms of scattered site is an RFP for the rest of the units, about 6,950 or so units, and those will be on a rolling basis, and we expect that RFP out shortly. And there's the pending RFP for the service piece of the congregate units that we will be deciding relatively expeditiously. So there's a lot happening all at once in the city. Watch the RFPs, continue to work with HPD and Department of Social Services, and there's the government collaboration with the state as well that I think helps us move the whole process forward. So to come back to a question that was asked before, there is no New York 4, but I think if you listen to what each of the agencies are describing in terms of what we're actually doing, you see a tremendous amount of collaboration and tremendous numbers of units that are going to begin to be linked to actual human beings literally this year.
Thank you. What is also different, I feel in this go around, is that we are seeing more of the RFPs be open window, so that it'll be more for the nonprofit who's trying to secure the site and get your board on board to line up your financing. It's much easier to be accessing the capital dollars as they're available and the service dollars and the rental assistance in a rolling basis. So that's something new, and I think really will be very helpful for our community. And then I also want to talk to you a little bit about the vulnerability index. That will also be something very new that's really been driven for us by HUD. So HUD has asked across the country that all continuums of care that receive HUD funding for homeless services and permanent supportive housing develop a coordinated assessment and placement system. We have a whole workshop on it today. It might be right now, but you'll be able to hear about it and see the PowerPoint presentations. It is still for the city. You can only imagine the size of that effort to basically manage the entire front door, not just from DHS, but from all of the shelters, so the domestic violence, from the HASA transitional to HPD. It's a tremendous effort, and to have all of those people similarly assessed and then determined where they are and being the most vulnerable, so that that very, very scarce resource of supportive housing is given to those most in need. And we also, that workshop will be terrific. We also have a workshop on NYC 1515 and a separate workshop on the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative. So those are definitely more places to hear more details. And so now we do have a lot of other housing programs going on. And RuthAnne, I wanted to give you some time to talk about all of the other programs within the $2.5 billion and how things are taking off.
Sure. When I talk about our programs, I try to sort of talk about them thematically so that people, well, partially so they don't fall asleep, and partially to put a little bit of sense around them. So we sort of divided ourselves and the work we do into 4 areas. So we have launched a series of programs under new construction. So when we think about new construction, we think about new construction of family housing, we think about senior housing, we think about middle income housing, we think about SIP, which is the HCR resource that helps provide funding specifically in the city for community facility type ground floor uses. And of course supportive housing. So sort of our bucket of programs within the new construction sort of cover that spectrum of housing types. Flipping into preservation, we have a series of programs in our preservation bucket, and so that's focused on preservation of public housing. So we do have funding for NYCHA, but our public housing preservation program is specifically for non-NYCHA upstate housing authorities, targeted mostly to housing authorities that have RAD, that need to execute on their RAD contract, but need capital in order to make the deals work. So public housing preservation, multifamily preservation. We've had a fairly robust Mitchell-Lama preservation when we bought the UDC portfolio a couple of years ago, and we're working our way through refinancing that. But there's also a number of other state Mitchell-Lamas around the state that we, including in New York City, but also around the state, that we wanted to make sure they were continued funds to make sure that those buildings can access low-cost capital as well. In sort of the last one in preservation, and this one we won't roll out when we roll out our open window RFP in a couple days. It'll come a little after, which will be a small building rental preservation program targeted primarily upstate, but really trying to get at small buildings that don't normally access government programs or can't access government programs. As folks know, doing 9% applications is not for the faint of heart, and doing a 4% bond deal is expensive and big, and so we want to make sure that we don't miss sort of smaller operators for whom either of those financial structures work. So new construction and preservation. Our third category is homeownership. So we have a couple of programs rolled. We have AHG, which many folks are familiar with, both in the city and upstate, and also have a lot of programs within the state of New York mortgage agency, Fannie Mae, looking at zombie homes and other sort of distressed single-family asset type programs. And then the last thing we think about is, hopefully I'm not missing one, is community development. And so within community development, sort of our main program that we have is the Main Street program, which is been a really successful program. So it's work in small downtowns, staying and doing sort of storefronts and improvements. And we also have been very active in the state downtown revitalization initiative, which was 10 communities of the state that were applied and won $10 million each for targeted projects in their communities. So we have a lot of community revitalization type projects in those too. So as you'll see when our RFP comes out, sort of those are kind of the way we think about our new construction, our preservation, our homeownership, and our community development, and sort of thematically to get across the state, to try to touch everything everywhere as best we can. And so you'll see sort of the beginning of that when our RFP comes out in the next couple of days.
Okay, thank you. And Molly, you have a number of programs going as well, in addition to supportive housing. But I also wanted you to kind of talk about if someone really is going to come to both HCR and to you and maybe to HHAP, where would you suggest that they start first?
Well, everybody should always start with HPD, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a variety of different approaches, and there is no cookie cutter answer to anything. There are sometimes what we see is projects that have a 9% award from HCR, and that's locked in, and then it turns out there's a gap, and we can work with them on a gap filler basis. Other times they're starting with us and getting rental assistance through the state. As we've been looking at our term sheets and our program operation overall, I think one of the guiding themes has been that we need flexibility. Not every neighborhood is the same, not every project is the same, not every, so we are trying, and one of the answers that I hate when we are confronted with a problem is because the term sheet said so, right? Like that is something that we can solve, and we can try and solve it, and we can work our way through those issues. So that is a very long way of saying I don't think there is a right answer to that question. One of the things that I think we are doing within all of our programs is trying to break down some of the silos of what has been like homeless housing exists over here and everything else exists over there. I talked a little bit about at the beginning that all of our preservation programs now include homeless set-asides. That's really important. And our new construction programs, you're increasingly seeing sort of bits and pieces of different, what have been special populations now all in one building. And I think we've actually, our staffing reorganization that we've done recently really reflects that. So many of you, I'm sure everybody here knows Jessica Katz, who has been a major force in supportive housing for so many years. She's now the Associate Commissioner for New Construction, right, which includes both the special needs housing and the family new construction housing. because there's less of, something is this and not that, right? We have buildings that are some family and some senior and some family and some supportive and sometimes a little bit of everything. And that's really the model that we're looking at moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So very true, right? We went from 100% supportive housing to a very integrated model that was also meeting just the affordable need in the community, which has been really amazing. And so, Dr. Sullivan, you talked a little bit about the reinvestment and creating the 1,100 units of housing. And so we want to hear how that's going, really moving people from institutions back to the community. You talked about reentry. And then also maybe if you can kind of throw in Bonnie's question about the intersect between health and housing, that would be good too.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think when you think about housing for very high need, very vulnerable populations, you really have to think about the services that you wrap around them as well. In addition to whatever the housing provider has, and I realize as the stipends are higher, you can provide more, but sometimes there's even more than that that's needed, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, the medical, et cetera, and reinvestment. We put up about 1,100 units across the state of reinvestment, and those units were for often very, very long stays in our state hospitals, some of them 2 years, some of them 5 years, some of them 10 years, some of them longer. And when you think about an individual like that moving into what ultimately becomes a scatter site, they move transitionally into our TLRs and then into scatter sites apartments, they need a lot of wraparound in addition to whatever is already there. So we set up what we call mobile integration teams, which are state staff who are now not serving inpatients anymore, who would go out and do the very heavy-duty clinical work with those individuals, in addition to whatever else supports we set up. And we found that worked. And even the housing providers, who are a little reluctant sometimes to take our clients who had been institutionalized so long, learned that was okay as long as we had these extra support services that could go out and work with the individual and work with the provider and make sure that there was a safe transition. And they would work as long as the client needed it. And some, we have very few, actually, even of those very long stay patients come back. It's a similar model which we used with about 400 beds that were allocated for criminally justice-involved forensic patients. This was funded in 2014. They are now all up and out. We wrapped services around them as well, and that worked too in terms of preventing recidivism back into prisons. Unfortunately, most of those have already been filled now. They get filled very quickly, and we're now, again, in a crisis of looking for more forensic criminal justice beds, but again with the wraparound services. The other thing we're trying this year for the first time in the budget is on a lot of our state campuses, we have these big old buildings which were kind of built with just individual rooms for people, congregate eating, congregate bathrooms, etc. In the days when they're better than inpatient, probably being in the hospital, but they're still on our grounds and fairly restrictive in their own way, even though the door's open. So we are going to be closing some of those, using the funding from that to open up community-based housing at a 2-for-1. So basically, if we close 140 of those beds, we can open up 280 units of community-based housing, and again have wraparound services to go with those individuals into the community. And we'll see how that works. It depends on how successful we can be, but it's another very important piece. And I think the issue of the medical client and the issue of the high vulnerable client in the shelters is that we need to put our heads together and wrap the kinds of services around those individuals. We've been finding that many of the individuals who could be in managed long-term care, it's something to kind of think about. They provide those kinds of in-home medical services, et cetera, for some of our clients, especially if they're Medicaid. We have to work better with those agencies to see what's available and what we can get in the home in terms of home care, other things for individuals who are high-need medical, and then maybe also need some special housing where there's a little more available in those settings to keep an eye on somebody who's a diabetic or keep an eye on somebody who's got COPD. Are they taking the medicines that they need? I think we need to think about some specialized, perhaps, housing, but also using every community resource that's out there to wrap these services around, and maybe we have to come out with some intervention teams to do this as well. So we'll be looking at that. And then the vulnerable need, there was a question about vulnerable needs in the shelters, and we're starting again, if this works, maybe we can expand it. In the mental health shelters, we're going to be adding ACT teams. Those ACT teams will be working with those very high-need guys who've waited too long in the shelter. They will work with them into their transition into housing. And I think that may, again, offer a comfort level to the housing provider, wherever they are, that this team that's been working with them, getting them ready for housing, will be there when they move. And I think that kind of comfort level makes a huge difference in terms of housing providers working with our clients, and also the continuity that they know who's going to be with them and who's going to work with them. So I think we have to start thinking about those models. Some of it should be from other sources like ACT teams or, perhaps special integration teams, special medical teams. But some of these vulnerable clients need more intensive wraparound than even with the $25,000 that will be there for some of this that you guys are usually doing. There has to be that clinical connection too. So we're trying those, and we're hopeful that that will help move those very, very tip of the iceberg clients into permanent housing.
That's great. Commissioner Banks, did you want to say something?
Do you
It's
want
like
me to-
inching towards the mic and then sitting back, so.
Do you want me to say something? Look, I think, all of these pieces are very important pieces of the puzzle from what I said at the outset in terms of having a comprehensive approach to addressing homelessness. People have said this, and it's nothing new. It didn't happen overnight. It's a 115% increase in the last, 1994, 20-year period of time. And so the sort of resources that are being brought to bear now, I think are a really important component. The addressing conditions in shelters, bringing people in from the streets, prevention, but also the housing development. These are all elements that, had they been present over the course of many, many years, we wouldn't be here. But the fact that they're now being brought to bear, I think, is a path forward. Particularly the collaboration that we've had with Anne and her staff on the ACT teams, I think, are an important step forward to addressing some of the health issues that are very real. We've used rental assistance certainly as an important bridge, as some of these other programs are coming online, but as an important bridge to stop the growth. But that too requires aftercare services and follow-up services, and we have a pending RFP will be decided shortly about additional aftercare services through the home-based providers, who are very important partners in making sure once people move out of shelter, they're able to remain in their housing in the community. So I think all of these pieces have to work together in order for there to be the progress that everyone in this room wants and that we want up here.
So I think that's an amazing change and really recognition, because I think those long-term stayers, those individuals who are very chronic and need a lot of additional assistance to really be successful. And I know, in the supportive housing community, we struggle with taking someone from a state institution or someone who's been in long-term in the shelter and helping them be successful in the community. And often there is a need of additional services. Or the family that's been in the system for a long time but takes the rental assistance link voucher, goes into the community, but to prevent that family from coming back in, might need the short-term assistance to get them stabilized. So this is really kind of a new way of talking and really looking at the crisis, and I think it's really very commendable.
Can I chime in? We've been hearing a lot about services, certainly in the context of the homeless set-asides that we produce, but something that I want to be thinking about, and we're not quite there yet, but is really, what is the line that defines the need for services? And I'm not talking at this point about the extremely high need populations that were mentioned earlier, but when it's a family coming out of the shelter system, how different is that from a family who is earning $24,000 a year for that family of three? And do we want to be aligning aftercare services based on where you spent last night or based on the needs of the family? And this is a whole slew of questions, and I don't actually have any answers for them yet, and I certainly don't have funding to do it, but it is something that we've heard a lot about and that we're really actively thinking about.
I think we all struggle with that, right? The very low-income family in the community is just a paycheck away from being in a shelter system. And I think we've also done a tremendous amount on the front end to kind of prevent those families from coming in. But I think it would be a great conversation to have as at what level of service, if a service is needed to really get someone back into the community and for them not to return to homelessness. Commissioner Guinn, I just wanted to talk because the state, about a year ago, the governor created the Interagency Council on the Homeless, and I know OTPA is leading that effort, and we'd love to hear how things are going.
Okay, sure. Right, so it was just a year ago today that the governor announced the New York State Interagency Council on Homeless, which is actually under the leadership of Homes and Community Renewal, RuthAnne, and also Fran Barrett from the governor's office. And OTDA has been playing a strong role in terms of providing staff support, helping to keep things going with the task force. And I would definitely be remiss if I didn't mention both Linda Glassman and her team for all the work that they've put forward with that effort. So the council is strong. I think it's strong because of the membership and the way it was created. It includes both the leadership from Fran Barrett and Homes and Community Renewal, but also the membership includes representatives from 10 nonprofit providers throughout the state. So it's a good mix of policymakers, funders, but also practitioners who know day to day what the issues are. And so one of the first things that the leadership decided was necessary was really to create a series of work groups within the task force, because as we know, not everyone becomes homeless for the same reason. I mean, clearly economics is part of it, but there are a lot of different reasons why people end up homeless. And so as a result of that, there were several work groups created that are focusing on different populations and making sure that we're thinking through strategies that will best serve those populations and address their needs. Some of the work groups got started earlier than others. Some are really just kicking off into a year, but just quickly, the different groups include those focusing on runaway and homeless youth, individuals with mental illness, individuals who are being discharged from healthcare facilities, also individuals being released from incarceration, as well as looking at specific needs of victims of domestic violence and veterans. As a result of just some of the initial work, and again, I would say that the runaway and homeless youth work group certainly took an early start and started quickly identifying some specific needs for that population. They're continuing to do their work, but again, as a result of some of the early recommendations from that group, we were very successful in getting some changes to address that group. One of the important legislative changes that we were able to achieve was to provide much greater flexibility in terms of the time frames where service providers are able to provide emergency services to runaway and homeless youth. In the past, localities were limited to 60 days where they could provide those intervention services, and with the recognition that 60 days often is not enough, now each locality has the ability to expand that to provide those services for up to 120 days. So that was one positive change. Another with that group was to raise the age of eligibility for runaway and youth services from what was 21 years of age to 24 years of age. Again, that's an important change. Another outgrowth from the Interagency Council, which Dr. Sullivan's already addressed, is just the creation of the community, the assertive community treatment teams that are, again, working with the shelter population and homeless population in New York City to address their needs and make sure that they're well in their emergency housing, but also as they transition into permanent housing. And then lastly, a positive already that we've had as a result of some of the work here was to be able to move forward with a recommendation for a medical respite model, and that's actually in the city of Troy, New York, where it's a particular model that was created for people who were leaving hospitals but had nowhere to go. So they weren't medically appropriate to remain in the hospital, but really didn't have anywhere to go. And if we found a place for them to go, didn't have anyone to provide them with the ongoing care that they needed to move fully to recovery. And so that's a model that we'll be interested to see. Again, we definitely view it as financially a smart move, but also we'll be interested to see how that plays out and see if that's something that should be replicated more in other areas of the state. So that, the council's work continues. No one who's working on this wants it to be a paper council. We want it to actually not only come up with recommendations, but also due to the range of leadership and members of the task force, we hope that those recommendations, as some have already have, will be things that we can move forward with to make, again, positive changes to move forward and reduce homelessness.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to say anything?
I'm good for now.
So let me take a few questions, more questions from the audience, and I know we still left the three-quarter house question on the table, so we will get to that. But are there other, I saw some hands, I think, when we were talking. Karen?
One other question. One big category of folks facing homelessness are the folks who are paying $1,200 a month and their income is $1,300 a month, and there was a big effort to do the rollback screen, which I believe fell victim to the fact that we couldn't get the mansion tax or something. Could someone speak about that?
Sure. So we did have a proposal that would have been for rental assistance specifically for seniors that was linked to the mansion tax, which, as everybody knows, didn't move forward. We are aggressively working with our partners and other agencies so that anybody who is eligible for SHNNY can get it, which I realize it freezes rent where you are, so that it is a valuable benefit, but is not a silver bullet in any stretch of the imagination. We for the first time have a dedicated senior housing program, so we are starting units that are 100% for seniors, on a regular basis. Those are generally all with project-based Section 8 contracts, so that they are serving extremely low-income households. One of the other things that we are doing, the zoning changes that were passed along with NIH last year include density bonuses for senior housing. So actually within our regular, air quote, regular family buildings, what we're seeing very often is that there is a tier of senior housing for seniors, because it's good for the developer because the building can be a little bit bigger, but it also does help us serve what is a very growing population with real needs. So, excuse me, none of those are easy answers to what is a very real problem, but it is certainly something we're very aware of and trying to work on.
RuthAnne, do you have anything to add on your?
I mean, it counters that, right? We are in complement to that. To complement that, we have done a lot of senior housing at the state through sort of our existing programs, but this year we'll roll out sort of a targeted senior-only program to make sure that we're financing buildings that are 100% seniors and can be both from sort of physical and service sense designed appropriately. Last time what we were seeing was, which is also great, but the sort of senior units integrated into other types of housing, which we'll continue to do, but we wanted to make sure that we had a dedicated resource. So we will roll out $25 million this year for specifically 100% senior buildings.
Yep. Great. Commissioner Banks, do you want to talk about three-quarter houses?
It's great to have a problem that's festered for decades become a responsibility of your agency. But as they say, if not now, when? So I think there's a couple of things going on with three-quarters housing. Just to review, we came up with a way to attempt to identify three-quarters housing. That's actually the first problem. Where are they? And the metric that we have is 10 or more unrelated recipients of the shelter allowance, the rental allowance at $215 is a good proxy for where there are three-quarters houses. We've tried less. Somebody said, would you try 5? I know that my colleague Mike Boscott is here. If you try less, you get nursing homes, you get other things that are not really very valuable. We tried food stamps, we tried many other metrics. The only one that seems to have a hit is 10 or more unrelated adults receiving the $215 a month monthly rent payment. Many of the operators have become very adroit at renting to people receiving SSI, which we don't have the ability to track through the information that we've got, and neither does our TDA. So we have that challenge. The only metric we have finds most of the places, not all the places. And what we have done consistently is, as we find places in the places we've already found, there's a regular multi-agency inspection involving HPD and the fire department and Human Resources Administration and the Department of Buildings. And that inspection process had been aimed at addressing immediately hazardous type violations and also addressing overcrowding. And in the overcrowding setting, we've been offering people the ability to relocate into essentially what would be not a shelter system, but a temporary housing as if you're a vacate order victim. And we've worked very closely with Vocal and Three Quarters House Organizing Group and MFY to try to address the needs. We've been providing services and, most importantly, rehousing services. So using the SEPS rental assistance program, the single adult rental assistance program that we developed. We've been using that with Samaritan Village and now Bronx Works is involved as well to try to relocate people into permanent housing with rental subsidies. It is a problem that's reflective of all of the problems we've all been talking about for the last hour and a half. It's one that reflects decades of criminal justice system discharge issues. And it's one that reflects decades of housing market issues, all of which on some lane of the continuum, all the agencies are trying to address. But on the front lines, the daily work is really focused on trying to make sure that conditions aren't overcrowded and relocating people to temporary housing and then trying to connect them back into the community. On a parallel level, the HRA staff, together with the Office of Medicaid Inspector General and also the Medicaid Enforcement Unit in the Attorney General's office, have been very focused on the practice of requiring people to participate in certain treatment programs as a way of drawing down Medicaid dollars and conditioning housing on participation in certain drug treatment programs. And so our fraud prevention staff at HRA work very closely with law enforcement, and you've seen a number of prosecutions that have occurred to address the owners of these buildings who had a very lucrative business of forcing people to accept Medicaid-funded services, many of which they didn't need, in return for housing, which is unlawful under federal law. So there's many different enforcement pieces going on, but in some sense, it's a subset of everything that people are have been talking about this morning that we're trying to address in the housing market.
And I don't know from the state commissioners if there's been collaboration on the three-quarter housing or initiatives at the state level, and we're just going to leave it for Commissioner Banks to solve with HCD and city resources. Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure myself. Yes. Hi, Mark.
Hi. Speaking of criminal justice system discharges, I wonder if any of the panelists can speak to, in defining priority populations, are people leaving jails and prisons treated differently, the same as people leaving homeless shelters, psychiatric hospitals? The idea being that should you have to go from a prison or a jail to homeless shelter in order to be prioritized for housing?
RuthAnne, do you want to start, or Dr. Sullivan?
You're good. I don't want to speak over this.
I don't know that they're necessarily been priority. I think I would just say that our part of the effort that we're working on at this point is really DCGS and other agencies working to do a better job in terms of making sure that when people are discharged, that instead of being discharged in homelessness, that individuals who have a place to go. And DCGS, which I can't speak, a lot to their initiative. I know they have a number of new initiatives that they put in place in trying to beef up their efforts and be more aggressive in finding alternatives that are available to individuals so that they do not end up homeless upon discharge.
OMH in the past, not in this current ESHI funding, but in the past, some of the funding for housing, we did earmark that the housing was dedicated to individuals in the criminal justice system or leaving prisons, and worked with housing providers, often who had some special ability to work with that population. And I think that sometimes that has worked, sometimes it hasn't worked so well. But I think we have to think about this. How can we make it an incentive for everyone to want to work with this population. And it's not just housing providers, it's clinics, it's clinicians, it's a whole system of care that I think has to kind of begin to work with the criminal justice involved in a different way. And so I think we're talking about this and thinking about it. In the current housing that's coming out now, there are not those priority populations, but in some of our reinvestment dollars and some of our other sources of funding over time, we have earmarked it for forensic criminal justice involvement.
If I could just jump in there, Commissioner Sullivan, with regard to mental health, you're correct, but also with ESHI, there is a re-entry population, not specific to the Office of Mental Health,
yes,
but there is a re-entry
yeah.
population as one of the populations to be served in homelessness with ESHI.
Right. Yes, yeah.
So did everyone hear that? It's an ESHI population now, is individuals coming from the criminal justice system.
Right.
So no,
It has been re-entry.
Right.
Homeless re-entry is a population in ESHI.
right, I'm sorry.
And I would just
No, that's okay.
echo that as well from a capital side, that it is an eligible population to be
Right.
served under the
Right.
Homeless Housing Assistance Program.
So reentry eligible through HHAP and through ESHI. Ralph?
So a lot of wonderful stuff today, new development and services to go with the new beds, and we're thrilled about that. The reality of it is many of the people that we will want to serve will come from the shelters and the institutions into our existing programs. And what we're hearing from our members is those programs continue to lose the battle to inflation without increases, and organizations some are going under because of it. Some are talking about not being willing to do it much longer and giving up those programs. And so we really have a preservation issue here, and I'm wondering what's the plan for preserving the existing units and strengthening them so that we can work with the populations that are difficult to serve that you want us to.
Yeah, I think just from the OMH perspective, I think this is a very serious issue. I think, we have a lot of older housing in OMH, and these stipends for example, could be like $16,000 as compared to what is now services of $25,000 with the new housing that's coming out. And so there's this discrepancy, and it's big discrepancy, and it's big dollars to fix the discrepancy. So what we've been doing is chipping away at it. It's not good enough, but we've added about $2,000 over the past 4 years to what was the stipend, and this year there's another $10 million in the budget to do it. But it's something that we have to keep advocating for, because I do think we do have high need populations in that housing, and that housing, the support, the dollars around it really needs to be in the range of what the new housing is, but it's not there. So we have to continue to try to make that happen. Certainly your advocacy for that is important. I don't think it's that anybody doesn't want to. It's a big ticket, and it becomes difficult to just say, oh, we're going to bring everything up to $25,000 in support. But we've been chipping away at it slowly, and we will continue to work on that. But it's a big issue. It's a big issue.
One initiative that HPD is going to be rolling out, this is really only a small slice of the problem that you raised, but we are going to be launching a shelter modernization effort, working with some of the nonprofits that own shelters that have been shelters for a very long time, that have some significant capital needs, whereas HPD has real estate expertise that doesn't necessarily exist within the social service agencies. So we are going to be working with the shelter providers to do rehab, potentially add capacity either for permanent housing or for additional shelter beds as on a case-by-case basis. And I would expect as part of that process, there's also going to be looking at the shelter contract numbers, a necessary piece of that overall initiative. So we're going to be, that's a fiscal year 18 initiative that I'm excited to get started.
Thank you. Yes, I think our last question.
You have a question, what are there any specific housing services for youth that were like maybe have criminally involved, venturing back into community, and also specifically those who then, I guess, victims of, let's say, human trafficking? So I'm just wondering if any specific type of housing programs are being targeted towards youth, kind of mentioned that are criminally involved.
Let me see if I got your question. So for specific populations such as youth, runaway homeless youth, or youth being trafficked,
Yes, exactly.
are there specific programs for them?
Yes. or being initiatives?
Or new initiatives. Well, I mean, homeless youth is definitely in both NYC 1515 and with ESHI, so that's great. And then I don't know if there's other comments from our panelists about youth.
Yeah. I would just add, as part of our streamlining of all the city rental assistance programs through HRA, which we're doing this summer, one of the things we're addressing is something that many of you in the room had highlighted during the 9-day review, which is providing rental assistance to avoid, when possible, youth moving from youth shelters into the adult shelter system. And that has been a gap that's existed for many years, and the streamlining of rental assistance will address that, and we think give an additional tool to the youth shelter operators to avoid young people having to go to the adult system.
Mm-hmm. We've done a little, in addition to everything else, we've done a little of that with reinvestment, but kind of not enough. And I think it's something that we're looking at in terms of the need to really think about those populations with some of even the reinvestment dollars that we have in terms of earmarking some of it for that team. We haven't really done enough of what we need to do for that population on the OMH side without reinvestment dollars.
And actually, HUD is also driving this train within the coordinated assessment and placement. There's actually a category for youth that are being victimized, either sex trafficked, and they are also really challenging local communities to look at ending youth homelessness. And actually, for the city of New York, that has a very large crisis on its hand. The youth population numbers are fairly manageable, and so we've applied for the 100-day challenge to really place as many youth as possible. We didn't get it in the first round, but we're going to go for it again. And I think HUD's really looking for us to come up with some systemic issues. And I think both the city and the state with the housing supports, as well as, you heard from Commissioner Guinn about raising the age from 21 to 24. With the youth system, we have all different ages, we have all different time frames, and it's not very cohesive. So I think there's a lot that we can do there, and we really are looking forward to doing that work. So just join me in thanking our amazing panel. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at lunch.
Oh, my God, it's great.